Hi, this is Stephen Brower from Mountain Valley Community College. Last night, June 11th, I did a demo of implementing the food and cheese class, and I ran out of time, and so I didn't get a chance to document the code. Actually, let me begin with food. So the Javadoc comments. Well, first of all, being in NetBeans, the nice thing is they can give us the shell. So if I go to before a constructor or a method and I do /** and hit enter, it gives us the shell for the comments. Basically, when we comment either a constructor or a method, we want to give a brief description of what it is. And then if there are parameters, meaning the data that's being passed in here, we describe what the data is and how it's being used. And if it does a return, constructors don't though, if it does a return, a description of the return value. So in this case right here, since this is the constructor, just can very simply say constructor, and we describe what's coming in. Usually a lot of times it's just going straight to a field, but if there's any kind of logic in the constructor, or if there's any kind of bounds, like the pizza example I did in class, size couldn't be less than 1 or greater than 3. And so if there's any restrictions, those would be listed in terms of the parameters, so that if someone is using the class, they know the restrictions that it has. So here I'll say this is the value for the description field, and this will be the value for the price field. And so for the Javadoc comments for the constructor, then this would be sufficient. Let me do this getter. So /** and I hit enter. So first there would be a brief description of the method. So the get description method. Now since there's no massaging that's going on, this is just returning the value that's in the description field. But sometimes a getter might be doing a translation, or it could be doing some kind of an adjustment, and that would need to be described, the kind of thing that takes place. Probably usually for a getter, it's just a straightforward return. It's more the calculation thing. So like the example of rectangle, the get area, if there's a more complicated calculation, there could be a larger description for the description. I mean, a larger description for the method. So returns the value in the description field. And I'll be lazy and just say the return is the value in the description field. We'll have a similar thing here for the get price. So the get price method returns the value in the price field. And by the way, for submitting things to me, if you notice that these are not complete sentences, but you know, I do want them to be descriptive enough. But if you have a typo, like if you misspell field, did I misspell field? If you misspell field, don't worry about getting points off for me on that. I'm not going to grade the comments as if it was an English composition class. Okay, so this setter, so in this case here, if you see the @param, the format here, it's @param, the name of the variable, and then we would describe it. I should have mentioned that back up here. @param, the name of the variable, and then we describe it. And what I didn't mention here is the @return, what was being returned, the @returned, what is being returned. And this actually goes back to the very, very, very old days in programming, where for quote-unquote procedures, which is the old name or predecessor of methods, we would describe it, we would talk about its inputs, meaning what gets passed to it, and its outputs, what it returns. Okay, so the set description method assigns a new value for the description field. And again, if there's any kind of bounds checking, then that would be mentioned here. And this, for this particular example, there isn't. So new description, new value for description field, price. Now, in terms of what I'm looking for documentation, I'll come back and describe this in a second. I am looking that your name is up top. So for all the code that you write, that you submit to me, put your name in. Now here there is the author tag. You don't have to use the author tag. It's preferable to use the author tag, but I am looking that your name is actually embedded in the comments. In terms of what I'm looking for, I'm not looking for you to describe the fields that are here. I'm looking for really just the Javadoc comments for the constructor, and then for all of the methods that the class has. Set price method assigns a new value for the price field. And I know that it probably seems a little bit redundant and straightforward, but it's what I'm not going to have us do is actually generate the HTML files. But the idea behind doing the documentation in the format, the reason why this documentation is done, is instead of having to create a separate document that gives the documentation our classes, we hit a button and it produces a web page. And then the web page gets the information from the comments part here. So the name of the method and then a description of its parameter. Name of the method, description of its parameter. The method and the description of its return. So the purpose of this is for documentation. I'm just not going to ask you to submit the actual Javadoc. Okay, here this is the constructor. And you know, let me be a little bit lazy here and say, let's take that value, and in this case I'll say is to pass to superclass. Whoops. For the description field. And value to pass to superclass for price field, and then this is going to be the value for the months aged. Now again, I'm not in this particular demo. I didn't do a restriction on the months, meaning that it can't be negative. You know, we didn't put any of that kind of a governor in here or restrictor. And if there was that kind of restriction that was being done, either logic here or making a reference to the setter that has it, that should be mentioned up here in terms of the parameter. Okay. So I got 2 more to go, and then I'll call the documentation of this one done. So the get months age method returns the value in the months age field. And again, we're not doing any kind of massaging. If we did, we would explain in the return how the value is being manipulated in some way. Like for example, suppose we did have some kind of a date as one of the fields, and we're going to be formatting that date in the way it's returned. We may describe in the return statement that there is some kind of a format that's taking place on the field. Okay, last one. So the set months aged method. Assigns a new value for the month's age field. And this is a new value for the month's aged field. Okay, and I'm using the keyword, I'm hitting Control S just to do a save, and I'm just making sure that the stuff I typed in didn't produce any errors. If I had missed or threw off the closing of the comments, it could throw it off. The other thing I want to just double check is I want to rerun the tester just to make sure that I'm getting the that I'm still getting the results, that my adding the comments didn't affect what I have. Normally when I would do this demo, the demo that I did last night on June 11th, normally I would be doing these one at a time, the descriptions, but I was keeping my eye on the clock, and I wanted to give us from 7:30 to 9:30 as the 2 hours for completing the lab. And so because of that, I did that little shortcut. I don't normally do all the documentation after the time. I usually do it as I go. Anyway, so this is something I didn't do last night. This is the Javadoc comments for the constructor and for the methods. The nice thing about NetBeans, you do the /**, it fills in it for you. For those that are not using NetBeans, you still have to do the /**. At the very end, you have to do // and then you'll have to know if there is a return type. You have to do @return and describe what's being returned. And if there is a parameter, whatever the parameter is here, @param, the name of the variable that we have, and then a description of what is expected. So general format, it's method description, and if there's an if there's a parameter, @param, and if there's a return value, @return.